I'm Marc Scorca, president of Opera America, and our media consultant has told us to be authentic. So you are in my den at home, and for those of you who know me, you see that I have not trimmed my beard since, or shaved my beard since we left the Opera America office on March 16th. And it's my determination not to trim it until we're back in the office, although that may lead to some fashion faux pas that need correcting. So we'll figure out about that. I am delighted to introduce to you one of my great colleagues, Laurie Baskin from Theater Communications Group. You'll hear me abbreviated as TCG, but it's Theater Communications Group. Laurie has been there for 23 years. I've been at Opera America for 30 years, and we've worked together through thick and thin all that time. So Laurie, thank you so much for being on the call today.
My pleasure.
We're going to introduce you to some of our capacity to provide advocacy on behalf of the field and what we do, how we do it. And we're very much going to then share with you all the ways that you can participate as advocates, building the case for support of the arts and your arts organization in your city, your state, and nationally. And we're going to then answer any questions you may have, and hopefully we all leave the call more informed and more motivated to really be active participants in this democracy of ours. Opera America is a founding member of the Performing Arts Alliance. Opera America, like Theater Communications Group, is a 501c3 organization. The Performing Arts Alliance is a 501c4 organization, which allows the Alliance to do more lobbying than we are allowed to do at our 501c3 organizations, although we can still advocate and lobby, but we'll get into some of those details. So there's the Performing Arts Alliance, and the founding members include the national service organizations for dance, theater, opera, symphony, and arts presenters, like the big performing arts centers that present activities in your city. We have lots of other members as well, but those 5 are the founding members of the Performing Arts Alliance. It's been around since the 1980s. We all also participate in an even broader coalition called the Cultural Advocacy Group. We abbreviate it, calling it CAG, because in Washington, D.C., everything has an abbreviation. CAG includes not only the performing arts, but also the visual arts and other arts-related nonprofits. So when we work as a coalition, there's a narrower coalition of the Performing Arts Alliance and the larger coalition of the Cultural Advocacy Group. Every Opera America member, organizational or individual, is automatically a member of the Performing Arts Alliance. And that's why if you're a member, you get regular updates, you get action alerts from time to time, and you are involved in the advocacy network that we are very much a part of. Now, there are also a number of other partnerships and affiliations and working groups, and we just want to let you know about a few of those so you get a sense of the scope of what we do. The independent sector is the largest umbrella organization for the entire nonprofit enterprise in the United States. And we're members of independent sector. And just the other day, we signed on to a letter that independent sector had sent to Capitol Hill. We also participate with the Charitable Giving Coalition. There are a lot of nonprofits together who want to improve the environment for charitable giving, who want to make sure there are even more and better tax benefits for charitable giving. That's organized through the Charitable Giving Coalition. There are a lot of people involved in arts education, from schools and universities that prepare teachers to arts organizations. So we're a member of the Arts Education Partnership. Opera America is on the steering committee for the Arts Education Partnership. We have other working groups. You'll hear in a minute that one of the really important issues for us is visas for foreign artists. You know, whenever an international star comes in from Europe or Asia or South America to the United States to work, they need a special kind of visa. It allows them to come across the border to work on a temporary basis. Over the years, getting visas for artists has become more and more complicated, and it's particularly complicated right now. So we have a working group that always is front-facing with the federal government to improve the visa practices and policies. We also have the Performing Arts Wireless Microphone Working Group, and we share various responsibilities. So at Opera America, we are very active in the arts education sphere. The wireless microphone realm is something that Laurie has led brilliantly for some years now. So Laurie, why don't you just introduce people to the wireless microphone issue that we work on so hard?
Sure. Thank you, Mark. So hi, everybody. I'm Laurie Baskin with Theater Communications Group. I actually should say before I worked at TCG, I was at the New York State Council on the Arts, working for then Chairman Kitty Carlisle Hart, herself an opera singer. So
Absolutely.
I thought I would best mention a night at the opera. But anyway, the wireless microphone issue is an FCC issue. As the FCC went through various spectrum auctions and shifting of reallocating spectrum to different sectors, wireless microphones have lost spectrum, had to move where they operated, which required buying new equipment, which is very expensive. And at the moment, the only entities that are eligible for a license are those that use 50 or more wireless devices on a regular basis. So amplification on stage, which we do more in theater than you do in opera, but still. Backstage communications, which are very important, of course, and not only keep the show looking good, but also involve safety concerns. And services that feed the devices for hearing impaired patrons. All of them operate with wireless devices. And unless we have access to this license, we operate where we are required to suffer interference. And interference could not only compromise the quality of the performances that people have paid a lot of money to attend, but compromise the safety and serving hearing impaired patrons and so forth. So we've been advocating with the FCC to lower the 50 device threshold of our 500 member theaters at Theater Communications Group. I would say maybe 5 of them regularly use 50 or more devices. So it is not common. I know opera and dance and others absolutely don't use 50 devices or more. It would be highly unusual. And yet the devices you use should not be compromised. So we've been talking with the FCC about this for quite some time, and it's ongoing, and it morphs over time into just new fun.
And this is to illustrate some of the rather arcane policies that we keep our fingers on. You don't hear a lot about it, but we are always working these issues if it's arts education. The fact that the Department of Education has a set aside, has a line item for arts education. We work every year to preserve that line item in the Department of Education bill and to increase it. Of course, we're worrying about funding for the cultural agencies, for tax policies and the benefits of taxes for visas. The portfolio is much larger than you would expect from Opera America or Theater Communications Group. So we're going to talk more about that today, but know that we really cover many bases. And again, for those who've just joined, because we're at 65 people on the call, if you touch your screen below my image or below Laurie's, you'll see that there's a place where you can ask questions or use the chat box, and we'll respond to you as the questions come up. One of the things that we do in working in coalition is that we have annual visits to Capitol Hill. Now, for those of you who were signed up for Opera America's National Trustee Forum and were coming to Washington for Trustee Week, we had appointments for about 50 people to go up on the Hill and meet with their congressmen or their senators in order to discuss how their opera companies strengthen communities, serve the public, and are worthy of tax deductions and support through the National Endowment for the Arts and other policies. Now, we had to cancel all of that, unfortunately, because of the cancellation of Trustee Forum, but we were prepared to bring our members up on the Hill to meet with legislators. Through the Cultural Advocacy Group, in this instance led by Americans for the Arts, an organization you've probably heard of, there's an annual Hill Day. It was to have taken place at the end of March, but it too had to be canceled. Laurie, would you describe what the annual Hill Day is?
Sure. So Arts Advocacy Day, yes, Americans for the Arts is the lead organization. We all join as national service organizations as co-sponsors. It's a 2-day event. The first day is training. Anybody who registers to attend will be briefed on all of the issues and how to conduct a lobbying visit. That evening, the day culminates in the Nancy Hanks lecture at I was going to say Carnegie Hall, Kennedy Center. And then the next day we head to the Hill. There's always a nice congressional arts kickoff breakfast where elected officials speak, and we kind of rally the troops and get all excited, and then go on our Hill visits. And I always bring a handful of TCG board members from around the country, and we are always well received. And we go from visit to visit and talk about the importance of our sector and lay out the issues that are federal issues that impact the arts. Whether we participate in the process or not, those issues are ongoing and they affect us. So it's great to show up, and that's what we do every year. Yeah.
Laurie, when you train people, of course, you give them a briefing about the issues, so got that. But when you train people for a Hill visit, what advice do you give them about how to conduct a Hill visit?
Oh, it's all about storytelling. We are developing and cultivating relationships with elected officials and their staff is very important. You don't always get to see the elected official themselves, but the staff members are there and they are tracking the issues and briefing their bosses. So those visits are equally important. But it's about finding connection with those people, talking about what's going on back home. Oh, have you been to that new restaurant or this, particular lovely bookstore or whatever is your thing, but finding a connection, what school you went to or whatever. And just like you build connections with funders and audience members and maybe the press, whatever are your stakeholder groups at home, your elected officials should absolutely be one of those important stakeholder groups. And it's important to know them and their staff in the district as well as in Washington for moments like this, the one we're in right now.
One of the questions that came up yesterday, and I felt it was a really good one, is the difference between advocacy and lobbying. And I wanted to see if I have it correct here. That lobbying tends to be when we're really asking people to vote a certain way on a particular piece of legislation.
Correct.
Advocacy is about the storytelling, is about laying the groundwork, laying the understanding for how the issues affect our field and how good our organizations are, how important our sector is. And we sort of talked about the fact that advocacy is more like, it's like educating our legislators. Do you agree that lobbying is about that specific bill? Advocacy is about this relationship building.
Yeah, so when you go to Capitol Hill, it's fascinating. It's really, really fascinating to see how many different groups are there. You go back and forth between the House and Senate buildings, and everybody is generally wearing a button or a name tag or something, and you can see what organization, what national organization has brought them to Washington and what issues they're advocating on behalf of. And absolutely, we need to show up too, and it is about educating elected officials and their staffs. We cannot expect them to know our sector. We know our sector. They are interested in knowing what's going on with constituents and important activities back in the district, but we need to tell them and we need to show them and illustrate there are jobs in our organizations, and this is the good, the public good that we provide in our community, and we can't expect them to know it. We need to bring it to them, educate them, and build relationships.
And of course, that happens locally as much as it happens in Washington, D.C. Because every congressperson, every senator has an office and a staff in their district.
Yes.
So that you don't have to come to Washington to cultivate these relationships. It can happen at home.
Yes, I think that there are different activities that staff monitor at the DC office than the district office. And I would say that the issues that we're talking about, the big federal policy issues do tend to be tracked more in Washington, and that more local and state issues and casework about, I couldn't access this thing, or we're having problems with local transportation or something like that, might be handled in the district.
Absolutely. But all of those district people talk to one another, the Washington people.
Yes.
And of course, the congressman or the senator, they go home during all of the recesses, all of the breaks, where they get briefed by their local office. So whether it is national or local, it still is relationship building.
Absolutely. And one important way to build that relationship is to invite them to your performances. We did talk yesterday about the restrictions on that. We cannot give gifts to elected officials, and tickets would, they have a monetary value, and so it would be considered a gift. If they come in their official capacity and they are delivering remarks or doing something official, I believe that makes the gift of the ticket allowable. Inviting them to education programs is absolutely permissible, because that would be a free event anyway.
I wanted to bring that up because so many of our companies do free events, do the concert in the park, do wonderful education programs, do pop-up performances in various places around the city. All of that is free. And in fact, for your elected officials, that's the kind of thing they want to see even more, because they can be working the crowd. Once they take off the face mask and take off their gloves, they can be shaking hands with people and walking around the park program, or see the teachers and the principal in the school as the children benefit from the education program.
And what's better than a picture with your elected official and children? I mean, really, it may be dogs, but children and education programs. And so if your organization receives a direct grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, I can't think of a better thing to do than to invite your elected official to come, and whether they actually present the check, but they ceremoniously present the grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, and it gives you an opportunity to publicly thank them for the gift and the grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, and have it covered in the media. That's a win-win for you and the elected official. And by the way, the National Endowment for the Arts.
We didn't talk about this yesterday. At Opera America, we send a letter to every NEA grantee when the grant is announced, congratulating them on receiving the grant and reminding them to send thank you letters to their congressional representatives and their senators, because the thank you letter reinforces the fact that the local company, the constituent, received the grant. And in that letter, you can say it's going to support this project or this education program, whatever it may be, but just treating your elected officials as if they were like your foundation grant officers.
That's right.
It's the same thing.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, our inclination is to thank the staff and the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts. And that's lovely, and we should. But we're not entitled to these grants. These grants are a competitive review process, and they are public dollars. And so to thank your two senators and your member of Congress for those grants, and to make that thank you as either public as possible or make it an educational moment, and to send that thank you letter with an explanation of what you use the grant for, that's wonderful advocacy.
Yeah. And I will say that when I did my first Hill Day, it feels so, so long ago. I probably went up to Capitol Hill in a horse and buggy, but I was nervous about it. You're the big halls of government, and a little intimidating, and also just feeling that, what difference does this make? When you are actually in the office talking to the staff or to the member or the senator, you really do feel as if you are participating in this American democracy. And we get, I think, a little bit cynical about, all the reports of big money and influence. Citizens have influence. If enough people talk to enough members of Congress and to senators about what matters to them, it moves the needle. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to action alerts, but it is deeply satisfying, like your civics junior high school class, to actually exercise your power as a voter to let your elected officials know what matters to you?
I've been doing this a long time and it never gets old. I am like not jaded by it. It's thrilling to walk the marble halls, see the flags, meet with the staffers, occasionally meet with the elected officials themselves, and feel a part of the process. And we are a part of the process, and showing up and communicating with them absolutely makes a difference. We've changed the minds of Tea Party folks back in the day. We have a theater in rural Pennsylvania, Bloomsburg Theater Ensemble, and they are in the district of a Tea Party guy who, there were 2 votes on NEA funding. And the first time he voted to decrease NEA funding, and we went to see him. And the second time it came up, he voted against that decrease. We flipped him in his vote. And he, hearing the story not only of the work that the theater company was doing, but they'd had flooding, and the theater people had provided their space as a sort of town hall meeting place. They'd help muck out, they said, after the flood, the town, and they became so central to the community life that this elected official had to be persuaded by their stories.
So there was just a question. I want to move on to the new legislation, the CARES Act, which was approved about 10 days ago and signed by the president. And it includes a number of things, and many of them have impact on the arts. The first is the SBA loans, the Small Business Administration loans. And the most popular program within that is the payroll protection loans. Right. And virtually all of our members have tried to apply or applied for those loans. We learned yesterday that it has been chaotic. Different banks have different procedures and policies for processing the loans. Wells Fargo said they would not process loans for organizations with more than 50 employees. 2 other banks said they wouldn't deal with nonprofit applications until April 10. But just yesterday, we signed on to a letter, and thank you, Laurie, for your email. We signed on to a letter to the National Bankers Association imploring them to be even-handed and to follow the legislation in terms of treating the nonprofit community as well as the for-profit community. So the SBA loans allowable up to a cap of 500 employees. We're working to try to increase that cap because some of our members, a couple of them, have more than 500 employees. But nonetheless, it's the first time, we'll talk about this we'll underscore this, that the nonprofits have been included in this kind of SBA loan program. We saw the supplemental unemployment insurance, where in addition to whatever the state unemployment insurance is, $600 per week is added to that through the end of July. And it includes contract, hourly, part-time, tip-based workers. So many of the kinds of people who are unemployed currently at our arts organizations are now eligible for the first time for unemployment insurance benefits through this bill. It's a really good thing. We received a $75 million extra allocation to the National Endowment for the Arts to help provide relief grants, similar to what happened in 2008-9 when the NEA had a supplemental $50 million. Now, on this, we are happy to have the $75 million. The box office loss in the opera field alone is over $100 million. In research I know done by TCG and theater, it could be as much as $750 million. Yeah. So the $75 million is, in what I categorize it as better than a poke in the eye, but it is only a drop in the bucket for what we will need to help stabilize arts organizations so they are ready for recovery. The other thing I wanted to chat about was in tax policy. Currently, as many of you know, the only way you can deduct your charitable gifts is if you itemize on your income tax. But the vast majority of Americans don't itemize. We've been fighting for years for what's called a universal tax deduction, where regardless of whether you can, or whether you itemize, you can still deduct charitable contributions. So in the bill, for a limited period of time, we won that. There's a cap of $300. Non-itemizers can deduct up to $300 on their taxes. For the other side, there's always been a cap in terms of how much major donors can deduct relative to their adjusted gross income. That cap has also been raised. So major donors are able to enjoy a larger tax benefit than before, and non-itemizers can get a tax deduction up to $300, all within a particular time frame here. But within these provisions, Laurie, you achieved some major victories here.
We did it together.
What are some of the ones that really stick out for you?
Oh, the fact that nonprofits are eligible for SBA loans, and they are forgiveness loans. So it's huge. The nonprofits being eligible for that was a big win. And the fact, as you said, with the unemployment insurance, that freelancers, gig workers who are make up the vast majority of artists in our field.
Laurie, there you are.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You froze for a second.
Yeah, so yes, I hope you still have me. I'm reading a sign across my screen that says my internet connection is unstable. We'll hope for the best.
Instability is something we're used to. That's okay.
Absolutely.
So the fact that unemployment insurance now covers a lot of the people who work in our industry.
Yes. Absolutely. So those were two big wins. We were hoping for a greater allocation to the National Endowment for the Arts. But honestly, I think that Congress was looking at the combination. It's the package as a whole, the SBA loans, the unemployment insurance, and the NEA funding together, that there would be multiple forms of relief to our sector. And we know it's not enough. And we know that there's a fourth stimulus bill coming, and we're talking about adding more resources. Maybe you're going to get to this later, but more resources to those existing pots.
Absolutely. And the money, the $75 million from the NEA is divided. According to legislation, any money that goes to the NEA is split between the federal agency, and 40% of it goes to the state and regional arts agencies. So only $45 million will be granted through the NEA. They will develop guidelines. Those guidelines will be promulgated fairly soon, in a few weeks, and we expect that some of that money will be circulating in the field by the beginning of July, once there is the application and the review process. We don't know what kind of projects will be covered. We don't know whether it's open to everybody or just to people who've already received grants from the NEA this year, last year. So we have to see, and we're watching it very carefully, and we are sharing our opinions with the NEA every opportunity that we have. So that's all going forward. Laurie?
Excuse me, there were two very important pieces that we do know about NEA funding. One is that the grants can be used towards general operating support, which is not the norm with NEA grants. It usually is project-based. So we are very pleased that funding will be eligible and available for general operating support, and that they've waived the matching requirement, which is also a help, and they're trying to ease things as much as they're able to.
Yeah, but of course, there won't be as many grants as we would wish, and they won't be as large as we wish, with only $75 million for all of the performing arts and visual arts that are funded by the NEA.
Right.
Keep in mind, though, that the balance of the money, $30 million, is going to the states. And we really encourage you to find your local arts advocacy organization or your state arts advocacy organization, because they will be helping to shape the local policy about how that money is going to be spent. And Laurie mentioned yesterday, how do you find out what your local arts or advocacy organization may be?
Oh, I usually Google, like, Citizens for the Arts in Ohio or whatever state, and usually that will bring you to whatever is the proper name for that statewide arts advocacy organization. And I highly recommend being in touch with them, getting on their mailing list, and that way you will find out when there's news, what's going on. And advocacy organizations at the state and federal level will send messages pre-prepared messages. We make it very easy. We send an action alert and we say, this vote is coming, this opportunity is coming, please weigh in with your elected officials. The note is already drafted. All you need to do is personalize it a little bit at the top. I'm the chair of the board of XYZ Opera Company. We serve so and so many people, audience members, students in our schools. We employ so and so many people. And this issue is important to us because, and hit send. It will take you 2 minutes and it's so important. They actually count how many messages they get from constituents. And I've been in Hill meetings and Hill offices where we bring something up and they say, well, I haven't heard from any constituents on that issue. And therefore, the subtext is, well, it must not be very important then. So if we want to be heard, we actually have to speak up together as a community.
And we'll talk about some of what your opera companies can do in just a minute. A couple of the other issues that we're watching right now, visas. So I mentioned it earlier on. Our opera companies that use international artists, whether it is singers or directors, designers, they need to have special visas. They're O1 visas to get technical, and they come into the United States, they're allowed to work. In order to get the visa, you have to go to a consular office of the United States in the country where you live. All of those consular offices are closed right now. And they say they're not accepting appointments until after August 15. Well, after August 15 means that the artists who might be expected in San Francisco or Chicago or New York for the Met can't get into the country to begin rehearsals. We are trying to work with the federal government to change some of the practices. Can people who had a visa approved last year still use it this year? Are there ways around this? So we're working on that, and it's an important one. Laurie also mentioned that we are looking at a phase 4 stimulus relief bill. And in some of the elements that we hope to see, one is if we have exhausted the SBA loan money from phase 3, can we have more such loan money in phase 4? If the unemployment situation is still dire, can we extend by 6, 10, 12 weeks, whatever the number is, the special unemployment insurance benefits? That would help a lot of our artists and employees. We're also looking at what the next big investment might be. And we hear from both sides of the aisle, and we'll touch on that in just a second, but we hear that infrastructure spending. For years now, we've talked about federal stimulus for building, repairing highways, bridges, tunnels, all that sort of thing. Well, if that is the center of phase 4, we want to make sure that infrastructure spending on cultural facilities is also included. We know that every theater and every performing arts center in the United States has deferred maintenance. Would it be possible, if there's a big infrastructure bill, for us to get the performing arts facilities included in that infrastructure spending? So those are things that we're watching out right now for. Laurie, are there other items that you have on your list that people are looking for in phase 4?
Well, it's interesting. That's what we need to know. We need to know, what are the unmet needs? I've heard a number of conversations lately, and one and an earlier call today. Most of the insurance policies that organizations had in place, even business interruption type policies, seem to not cover the coronavirus. So the question is, can the federal government have any influence over the insurance industry to expand that force majeure clause into what would be allowable and what they'd be able to cover? Yeah. So I know that's another issue that's come up. On the labor.
And a pointer on that one. So we've heard that a lot of business interruption insurance does not cover what's going on right now, as Laurie just said. That for business interruption insurance, there has to be damage to your actual facility, right, which in so many of these instances we don't have. But we've been advised that your company should still fill out the application for, still file a claim, because it may be that there is some federal action that requires the insurance industry to honor business interruption for the virus and not just for damage to the building. So don't give up. file the claim.
Yeah. Another issue we've been hearing is that independent artists, they get their health insurance through their unions. And so unemployment and, just loss of paycheck is a big concern, but equally concerning is the possible loss of health coverage if they don't have enough employment weeks this year. It's huge.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that there are a lot of conversations. Part of me just feels like, the unions don't have the resources to cover all of that. If people aren't earning their salaries and then paying into the unions, that's how they're able to provide the health coverage. That the insurance companies are not set up to pay out everybody all at once, which is, what a universal sort of force majeure. So I don't know what the answer is, but we are here to advocate for the performing arts and the artists that work with our companies. And those are two big issues that have come up lately that we'll be discussing with members of Congress.
And we do all kinds of surveys, and we have dozens and dozens of conference calls where we learn about this because, and please, when your opera companies complain about all of the Opera America surveys, when we're telling the story, data matters. So that we can say box office losses are more than $100 million. We're not saying, oh, it's a lot. We're saying it's $105 million extrapolated from our survey response. Or we're talking about the number of contracts that have been canceled due to cancellations. All of the numbers matter in our telling the story. Mm-hmm. So when you hear that Opera America or TCG is sending a lot of surveys, we're not doing it to keep ourselves busy. It's because it really does inform the stories that we're telling. Now, what can people do? And we have mentioned, Laurie has said it, and we would emphasize it again and again, the importance of citizen voices. As trustees, your voices matter more than ours. I am paid, Laurie is paid to do this work. You aren't. You are volunteering your time and you're making major contributions as leading citizens in your community. You are more connected to business leaders. You probably have more connections to elected officials than anyone on the staff of the opera company. So it is your volunteer generosity, your stature in the community that make you the strongest possible storytellers in this advocacy effort. So that's why we're talking to you about this. Some of our opera companies have advocacy or government affairs committees where groups of board members who are interested in the political world, where they are involved perhaps through their own business in government affairs, paying attention, whether it's the restaurant association or the airline, or everyone is paying attention to government affairs if they work in corporate America. People who are willing to read the action alerts, circulate the action alerts, get people to just press the respond now button and send in the letter. So government affairs committees, paying attention to your local, state, arts advocacy organizations, reading the Opera America action alerts, all of these things you can do. Now, Laurie, when the action alert comes, it is already pre-populated, isn't it, with the individual's congressperson?
Yes, you don't have to look up who your elected official is. I mean, I'm hoping you know who your elected officials are, but you don't have to look it up. The systems that we use now are sophisticated, and either your name and address are already in the system, or you enter your name and address and it matches you with your elected official. The message is pre-drafted. We just ask you to personalize it and hit send. It couldn't be easier.
And they count. They count. They not only do they count as in they matter, but the people who receive them count responses on an issue.
Absolutely. So I would say TCG has generated about 7,000 messages to Capitol Hill since March 11th. 7,000 messages is pretty good. It's certainly a lot better than we've done before this crisis. But I would say on a routine basis, when we're not in crisis mode, when we just are being aspirational and we would like our federal arts agency to have more money. And we send an action alert saying, please contact your elected officials about the annual appropriation for the National Endowment for the Arts. TCG has 500 member theaters. If everybody sent one message from each theater, that'd be 500 messages. I've challenged our member theaters to send 10 messages per theater. You know, we send it to trustees, the staff leadership, all the staff, etc., other lists that we have. It should be a routine thing that 5,000 messages go to the Hill every time I send an alert to the theater membership, and something comparable in the arts, in the opera field, and so on, dance and so forth. If we all across all the arts participated in an ongoing way in that fashion, we would have greater
oomph.
We have untapped power, and we would be exerting our voices in a more strong, cohesive way. I will tell you, AARP, you know, they send an alert, and I am sure that tens of thousands of messages are going to the Hill. The same thing with the dairy lobby, and you name it, just think of it. Imagine when they were going to get rid of the mortgage deduction, what the National Realtors Association must have been doing. So we have issues that impact how we operate in an ongoing way, and particularly right now, and we need to participate.
Two questions come up, and someone just put a very good one. The writer knows that the local elected official is very supportive of the arts and doesn't want to be bothersome. Like, we know that Jack or Jill, you know, already support the arts, so why should we send an action alert? Even though they are already on our side, they still count, don't they, Laurie?
They do count, and I don't think you should ever feel that you're bothering your elected officials too much. I mean, every day might be too much, but half a dozen times a year, not too much, you know? And if you know that Congressman Jerry Nadler here in New York is very supportive, as he is, write to him anyway and thank him for his support. Don't just assume his support. So no matter where your elected officials are on the political spectrum and whether they supported that thing that you asked for or not, ask them for the next thing and thank them for their support if they did support it. Yes, it's our job and their job to listen to constituents, and our job to let them know what we need.
Yeah. And I think an important point too is that it's not, you know, it's cultivation through the year. It's not just when we need something. The importance of inviting elected or the staff of the elected officials to education programs, or just sending them a brochure with a note that says we couldn't have done this without your support through the NEA, or the local arts agency or the state arts agency. Whatever it is, continuing the cultivation process. That's why I like the idea of having a board committee that might do it over the year, so that way it's constant and not just, you know, when there's a fire in the kitchen, you get out the fire extinguisher and try to put it out. That you are engaged regularly in the flow of advocacy, of education. So we also note that a lot of people assume that the arts are defined really only by the lead actor or actress or the two great singers. Our elected officials don't know that we have hundreds of people, the chorus, the orchestra, backstage, costumers, makeup people, in the administration, marketers, and education personnel. So it is amazing how little they really do know. And I don't say that in a derogatory way, how little they do know about the number of people who are employed at your opera company. And I remember, Laurie, this goes back to 2008 when we did the Performing Arts Convention. John Hickenlooper at the time was the mayor of Denver, and then he became the governor of Colorado before he became a presidential candidate. John Hickenlooper was a restaurateur in Denver. He owned like a dozen restaurants. He was an arts partisan because he knew that when the arts were in the theaters, his restaurants were full. So there are a lot of allies we have, and the story to tell about, it's not just the employees on stage, it is bartenders and ushers, and it's about the people who are going to restaurants. That's how important we are to civic life. And as we emerge from this crisis and are seeking ways to come back together as citizens sharing a downtown. The arts will be pulling us there. God bless you. The
Thank you.
arts will be pulling us there. We are not needy just because we want to exist. We have needs because we want to be a part of the cure of the separateness when our communities can come back together again. So there's a lot of storytelling that can go into this. And again, the action alerts come and they matter. Just taking a look about the other questions that are up here, and there was
Mark, may I jump in on one? I saw a question
please do.
that said, how do we reach certain elected officials who I think the assumption would be that they don't support us? And I'm going to say that our work has always been bipartisan. And what I mean by that is we go and talk to people on both sides of the aisle, in both houses, both chambers, and they're all receptive. They don't always vote the right way down the line, but I think that they're happy to hear from constituents on both sides of the aisle. Now, there are, as Mark said, probably a dozen issues that we cover on Arts Advocacy Day. I tend to track 5 of them all the time: funding for the National Endowment for the Arts, funding for arts education at the U.S. Department of Education, improving the visa process for artists from abroad, enhancing tax incentives for charitable giving, and the wireless microphones and protecting those, because it's another big investment and goes to the quality of performances. But those are our top 5. When you go to talk to staffers or Hill offices on those 5 issues, some of them actually appeal more to Democrats and some of them actually appeal more to Republicans. So you listen to, you pay attention to what office you're in and which issue is going to be, is going to land better, like consider the source, and which, and so if I were in a Republican office, I'd probably talk about the tax issue first. I'd still talk about funding for the NEA, but I would talk about the tax issues, because being able to get that tax incentive for charitable giving, the universal deduction, and that's an incentive for individuals to give to charities. Mm-hmm. That's a personal choice. That's an individual choice sort of thing. And it kind of aligns, at least with moderate Republicans, and it actually resonates with them pretty well. So
that brings up 2 issues. And one is the issue of strange bedfellows.
Yes.
And one other I'll get to in a second, the strange bedfellows. So a lot of these issues require us to work in cooperation with allies one wouldn't necessarily anticipate. Mm-hmm. On the universal charitable deduction and the ability to contribute $300 without being an itemizer, the religious community likes that a lot. Churches like, because there are a whole lot of people, cross-section of the American public, that go to church, but only the itemizers can deduct their charitable contributions. This universal charitable deduction that we have for a limited period of time enables anyone who goes to church or temple, whatever, to deduct their contributions. So on this one, we're working with the religious community. We might not be working with the religious community on supporting public broadcasting, but we find our partners to move the legislation forward. The other point is that some people like to hear about the instrumental value of the arts. The arts help the economy downtown. The arts employ people. The arts lead to the improvement of real estate in a neighborhood when the arts facility is open and suddenly there are condominiums and restaurants. That is the instrumental value of the art. Some people feel more comfortable talking about art as art and what it does to the human spirit, and how it is a source of inspiration and healing in our communities. We'll tell any story. Depending on the listener, what is the story that will connect with that listener? And that's why we always have the research, we always have the arguments, depending on who we're meeting with.
Mark, I saw a question that related to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and how that relates to our advocacy. I would say that it's part of our talking points, for instance, when we advocate for funding for the National Endowment for the Arts, that public funding, contrary to folks who don't believe in public funding for the arts, and there are those in Congress that believe it's an elite thing. Going to the arts is elite and only wealthy people are interested in that, and it doesn't appeal across the board. And I would say quite the contrary, that public funding for the arts is what makes the arts accessible and to underserved communities, both rural and urban, socioeconomically, and to different racial and ethnic groups. It's the arts that help break down the barriers between people and help us understand each other a bit better. And we do talk about all of those issues throughout all of our talking points and on all of the issues that I talked about. I mean, the visa issue is another one. It's bringing artists from abroad and sending US artists overseas. Talk about cultural ambassadors. What better way to break down those barriers and help peoples of different nations and backgrounds understand each other better? I know that doesn't really get to equity in terms of funding. I think that's more of a conversation that we have all the time with the leadership of the National Endowment for the Arts. But in terms of Congress, we talk about it, but we don't want them writing the guidelines for the NEA because that could be a slippery slope. But we do raise these issues.
Yeah. Now, there was another question that came up in the chat room, and that's about Twitter and other forms of social media and elected officials. Is it only through Action Alert? Is it only through letter writing and phone calls? What about social media these days in advocacy?
I think it's uneven. I think some members of Congress pay more attention to it. I think they look at the messages they receive on Twitter and all the other platforms. I just think that when we send a campaign, an action alert that you can click through and send an email, it's the fastest, most efficient. And they count those. We know that for sure. I would not send any snail mail, no old-fashioned mail. It still, I think, to this day, goes to someplace in Virginia and gets irradiated in case that it's contaminated. So it takes months actually to arrive, and it is not reliable. But the emails, I think, is the most effective and efficient.
And that's what we do with our action alerts.
Yes.
And there was a question just now about whether we also advocate for the National Endowment for the Humanities. And I would say, in the big spectrum, yes, we are in support of federal funding for the cultural agencies. And that's the NEA, the NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities, IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and public television, public radio. So we do stand for support of the cultural agencies. Then we do narrow it to the National Endowment for the Arts because it is the NEA that supports our opera companies and our theater companies.
Yes, everything that you said, Mark, with one slight, we coordinate. There's somebody from the Humanities Alliance joins our cultural advocacy group calls, and we are always in coordination so that we are asking for the same dollar amount for the NEA and the NEH. I don't include NEH in my action alerts because there's a whole set of humanities advocates across this country, just like you all in the arts and us all. So they have their own humanities Hill Day. And so I totally support them. But if we don't take the lead on funding for the National Endowment for the Arts, nobody else will. So it's, I always, if you have to narrow your message so that people really take action on one thing, for us, it's the National Endowment for the Arts. But know that we always advocate for parity between the two, and we coordinate our ask.
Thank you for that. And it's also the case, in our last couple of minutes here, that we advocate and we'll send you action alerts. And we're very careful about how many action alerts we send and the timing. We don't want to burden you. That's why having an advocacy committee or a government affairs committee can help spread that. That we send those out. We ask you to respond. We think about the timing of them. But the other train of thought that I had, I just lost. It'll come back to me in the issues. Well, it'll come back.
Somebody asked, they said they're not getting the action alerts. How would they sign up to receive them,
Now,
Mark?
I don't know if that individual is an individual member of Opera America. Not everyone on this call necessarily is, but if you're an individual member of Opera America, you will automatically get these action alerts. And hopefully, because your opera company is a member of Opera America, you can ask the staff whenever they get an action alert to share it with members of the board. So that is entirely possible.
Well, actually, I'd urge every board member on this call to ask the senior staff leadership of your organizations to forward action alerts to the entire board routinely, so that if your board is 10 people or 50 people, if everybody sent one email in response to every action alert, that would be absolutely tremendous.
What I was going to say when I got derailed was that the issues that we follow are the ones we've identified that only we will push on. There are a lot of other issues out in the world that are being led by other worthy advocacy organizations that have a lot more money and a lot more staff than we do. So we have chosen, Laurie articulated so well those 5 issues. Those are the 5 where we've boiled it down, knowing that if we don't, no one will. So that's why the action alerts from us are focused, and they are rather specific, because we have, again, put it through the filter of if we don't do it, no one will. Now, we're nearly at the end of our time today. We've answered all of the questions that have come up, and I'm very grateful for all the questions that we've had. I always end, we are your service organization. So I'm Marc, M-A-R-C, always remember the C, M-A-R-C at operaamerica.org. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, please email me. Let me know what's on your mind. We are here to serve you. Beyond that, all I can say is that Laurie Baskin is one of the greatest colleagues anyone could have. For the last 23 years, I've been blessed to work with her. And thank you so much for being a part of this. We'll work together on the next issue and the one that comes after that. Laurie, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's a great joy to do this together with you. These are tough times, but I'm glad we're in it together.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being on the call today. We'll be in touch soon. Stay healthy, stay safe. Thanks very much.
Thank you.